You plug your phone in at 20%, and half an hour later, it's at 70. So you leave it plugged in for another half hour, and that second half hour only gets you to about 85. And every fast charging number you've ever seen works like that. 50% in 30 minutes, 55% in 30 minutes. But nobody quotes you a number to 100, and nobody ever has. So what's the second half of a charge doing that the first half isn't? Because your phone isn't slowing down to be careful with you. A charger doesn't pour charge into your battery. That's the part everybody has backwards. And pretty much everything else here depends on it. What a charger actually does is hold its own voltage higher than the battery's voltage. And charge flows because there's a difference between those two numbers. It's the same relationship that shuts your phone off at 30%, just running the other way. So when your battery's nearly empty, it's sitting low, and the difference between the two is big, and the charger hands over everything it's rated for. That's the fast part. That's the part you paid for. But every bit of charge that goes in pushes the battery's own voltage up a little. So the difference gets a bit smaller, which means your battery is closing the gap that's driving it the whole way up. A battery isn't a container you pour into. It's a voltage you push against, and the fuller it gets, the harder it pushes back. But the charger can't just keep pushing. There's a line the battery's voltage isn't allowed to cross, and on a classic lithium battery, that line is 4.20 volts. Now look at what that line actually is, because this is where the whole thing turns. It's a limit on voltage. It's not a limit on how much charge is in there, and those two aren't the same thing at all. So when your battery gets up to 4.20 volts, it's only about 85% full. And 85 is a rounded number, I think, because you'll get a slightly different number out of a different battery and out of a different charger. But it always works the same way. So 15% of the charge is still missing, right at the moment the charger has almost nothing left to push with. The fast half of the charge is over, and it ended on a number that isn't measuring how full anything is. So now the charger switches jobs. Up to here, it's been setting the current and letting the voltage go wherever it goes. From here, it does the opposite. It holds the voltage right at that ceiling, and it lets the current go wherever it goes, and the current goes down. There's no rule holding it back, and nothing kicked in to slow it down. The charger's just holding at 4.20 volts, and your battery's sitting a hair below that, and the current that flows is whatever that shrinking difference can still push. So as the battery creeps up toward the ceiling, the difference gets smaller, so the current gets smaller, so the battery creeps up even slower than it did a second ago. And every bit of charge you get in makes the next bit harder to get in. Nobody wrote that down as a rule. That's just what you get when you're pushing against something that pushes back. Which leaves kind of an odd question. If the current keeps falling and it never quite gets to zero, then how does anything decide your battery is full? And the answer is that nothing measures how full it is. The charger just watches the current, and it calls the job done when the current has dropped to somewhere between 3 and 5% of what it started at. There's one real battery datasheet that puts both of those numbers right there on the same page. It starts the charge at 1,625 milliamps, and it calls the battery full when the current has fallen to 65. That's 4% of where it started, and that same page gives the standard charge time for that cell, 4 hours. That's a lab cell being charged gently, so it isn't your phone's number, but it's the same job, split the same way, and the tail end of that job is a charger standing over a drip. So picture a tap. It starts out running hard enough to fill a bucket in about 60 seconds, and it finishes as that same tap dripping with the charger standing over it, waiting for the drip to get slow enough to count as stopped. So your phone doesn't say 100% when it's full. It says 100% when the dripping finally stops. So the obvious move is to go buy a bigger charger. And the obvious move works on exactly one half of the problem. More current does get you up to the ceiling sooner, and that's real, and that's what the number on the box is measuring. But getting up to the ceiling sooner means you get there with more of the charge still missing. So the slow half starts earlier, and it's got further to go. The people who measure this for a living say it pretty plainly. A bigger charge current shortens the first stage, and it makes the slow stage longer to match. So every watt you spend goes into the half of the job that was already fast. And the half you're actually standing there waiting on is the half nobody sells you, which is why nobody's ever quoted you a number to 100. So that just leaves the ceiling itself. And the ceiling is the one part of this that really is somebody's decision. If you push a lithium battery past the voltage it was built for, the lithium stops going where it's supposed to go. Instead of sliding in between the layers of graphite, it sticks to the outside as metal, and it doesn't come back off. So the charge has to get cut off completely instead of trickling along. And that's why the ceiling sits exactly where it sits. It also explains a setting you've almost certainly been offered and probably took for your phone being careful with you. When your phone offers to stop at 80%, it isn't showing restraint. It's just moving that ceiling down. And a lower ceiling means your battery gets there sooner and you wait through less of the slow half. And somebody has measured what that trade actually costs you. Drop the ceiling from 4.20 volts down to 4.10 and the same cell gets to about 80% in 2 3/4 hours, instead of about 85% in 3. So you're handing back 5 points of charge and you're getting 1/4 of an hour of your life back. So the gentler option is also the faster one, which you don't often get to say about anything. And heat is a separate break, by the way. A warm phone really is being held back on purpose. So go back to that plug at 20%. You were never watching a container fill up, and your phone was never slowing down to protect you from anything. There were just 2 voltages with a difference between them. And that difference was wide when you started, and it got a little smaller with every bit of charge that crossed it until there was almost nothing left to push with. So the first half of a charge is a charger pushing, and the second half is a charger waiting on a difference it's standing on top of. And when your phone finally says 100%, that's not a level anybody measured. That's a charger giving up on a drip. It can't push anymore. Everything you just figured out rests on something deeper, and that's the next video, so start there. Would you rather understand your computer than just use it? Then subscribe, and I'll see you next time, further down the stack.